Good evening, everybody. My name is Travis Lange with the city. I'm the Environmental Services Manager. While we're waiting for the presentation to get up, basically my division is within Public Works, and we handle things like the trash hauling contracts, recycling, and then dealing with a lot of state and federal regulations to try and keep the city out of trouble in that regard, obviously related to environmental concerns. But today, I've been asked, and thank you very much for having me. Thank you for asking me here, Mr. Ferdman, to talk to you about the state and federal requirements when it comes to water quality. And basically, it's the city's program, like I said before, to try and make sure that we stay in compliance with environmental regulations, but it's directly related to water quality. The Federal Clean Water Act, the modern version of it, was passed back in 1972. The state of California passed what's called the Porter Cologne Act a couple of years before that. And the Federal Environmental Protection Agency basically delegates authority to the State Water Resources Control Board to make sure that those water quality regulations are followed. And then they do that through 9 regional water quality control boards. The Santa Clarita Valley is part of the Los Angeles region, and our permit deals with all of LA County. It's somewhere above 80 cities that are involved with that permit. Although the watershed goes all the way through Ventura, Ventura has their own permit. So what we deal with at the city is a permit that's linked with LA County, not Ventura County. When it gets to the local level and it deals with regulations placed on cities, because many people have what are called stormwater permits or National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permits. But with the city, it's called an MS4. And basically what it regulates is what comes out of our storm drain system and travels into the river, in our case. In many cases, it's what actually enters the beach or the ocean. But our focus is mainly on the river up here because obviously the beach is quite a distance away. And when I mean storm drain system, I mean the streets and the gutter system that leads to that little box that's in the sidewalk that all the water disappears into when it rains. And what many people don't realize is that does not lead to a treatment system. That goes directly to the river. And because it goes directly to the river, we are highly regulated by the state and federal government to make sure that the only thing that enters that storm drain system is clean rainwater. Up there it says the city's goal is to prevent pollution to the receiving waters. The receiving waters is essentially the Santa Clara River. And really what our goal is is to comply with the federal and state regulations, to prevent fines that would ultimately impact the citizens and businesses in the valley, and then also to prevent the opportunity for third parties to step in and make a claim that we're not following the regulations and sue the city, which would also impact the citizens and the businesses. And we balance that with, obviously, the need also to just in general protect our environment. We want to try and do that, and what we work very hard at doing is doing it in a way that we're dealing with the fiscal aspects of it as responsibly as possible. Obviously the money to comply with that comes from the citizens and businesses within the valley, and so we do our best to comply with the regulations, but also balance that fine line between going overboard and not spending the money wisely and making sure that we keep the city out of trouble. As Mr. Ferdman alluded to, we did recently take an action at council. It was partly related to what's at the bottom of this slide, Enhanced Watershed Management Plan. This is not a new program. This is our 4th iteration of permit. I believe the first was 1990, then 1995, and then 2001, and the most recent iteration went into effect December of 2012. And with that recent permit, we need to put together what's called an Enhanced Watershed Management Plan. And it's a plan that, frankly, we will learn more about as we go along. We're literally still attending meetings that the Regional Water Quality Control Board is putting on so that we can better understand this over 500-page permit that over 80 cities have to comply with in Los Angeles County. But what we're hoping for is that this plan will provide an opportunity for us to look at what the issues are in the watershed, what pollutants are entering the water, and also, just as important, what pollutants aren't entering the water or the river. And by doing that, we're hoping that we're able to pinpoint a little bit better where we spend our resources and what we focus on, so that we're actually dealing with what's impacting the river and avoiding spending time and energy on things that aren't impacting the river. This is just kind of an outline of what I'm going to be talking about, and really these are sections in the actual permit. General municipal requirements, illicit discharge, illicit connections, industrial control, construction activity control, development planning, and then outreach, which obviously today is part of our outreach effort. For general municipal requirements, you'll see a list. This is some of the items in the permit that we're required to do, things like street sweeping, putting in devices to prevent trash from making it into the storm drains. We also have a program that we're required to go out and clean the catch basins and clean the storm drains, so that things that did make it in there are taken out prior to making it to the river. And then, obviously, outreach. One of the pieces that historically the county has done, and really up here they've done it's monitoring. And basically they've done monitoring at the end of the river when it's about to leave the upper Santa Clara River, so still within LA County. And they've monitored to see what's in the water at that point, when there is water in the river at that point. And with the new permit, we're going to have to put together a monitoring plan, and that will actually be in conjunction with that enhanced watershed management plan that I already spoke about. And with that, we're going to have to come up with a plan to show locations where we would monitor tributaries to the river, and then also areas within the river to try and get an idea of what's going on. So we'll use that monitoring data to get a better idea of what pollutants are entering the river and how to deal with those pollutants. And then, like I mentioned, what pollutants aren't entering the river that we don't have to worry about. In general, when we're speaking to people that don't deal with this every day, we basically make it a very simple: anything that's not clean rainwater can't go into the storm drain system and eventually to the river. However, when you look at the permit, there are a list of allowable discharges. Thank goodness, things like emergency firefighting activities are allowed. But believe it or not, even with that, with these exemptions, there are conditions associated with them. So, for instance, looking at dewatering of lakes, landscape irrigation, residential car washing, in general, we don't worry about those things. They are exempt in the permit. However, if for some reason there are some circumstances to show that that flow is picking up pollutants or causing a negative impact, then we are responsible for going and trying to get that fixed and dealt with. So just wanted to give you a sense of what's in the permit. So illicit discharge, illicit connections, which is really just a fancy term, another acronym, ICID, to say you can't dump your paint into the storm drain. The street and the storm drain is not the place to dispose of household hazardous waste and oil and things like that. So we do have inspectors that we're required to send out. Mostly they're dealing with calls from citizens that have concerns, but obviously if they're on their way to a call and they see something else that's going on, they stop and address it. Try and educate people that, like I said, many people don't realize that the storm drain does not go to a treatment plant. The stuff that goes to a treatment plant is the sewer system, not the storm drain system. And trying to educate them in the fact that there are other ways to deal with their waste, and dumping it into the storm drain system is not the way that they're able to do it. And then the illicit connection part of it is And it doesn't happen, frankly, as much up here in Santa Clarita as it does in many of the older communities down in the lower parts of Los Angeles. But there are connections where somebody has drilled a pipe into the actual storm drain system so they can more easily get rid of waste that they don't want to get rid of. And that's just not the place to do it. So when we discover those things or those sorts of things are reported to us, we go out, take a look at that as well. And if we can ascertain that it's an illegal connection, then we work with, well, if we're able to find who's responsible, we work with them to get it eliminated. Otherwise, we take matters into our own hands to make sure that there's no more discharge that's not legally allowed to happen coming out of that pipe. And then this is really just more specifics in regards to the ICID program that I just spoke about in the slide before. This just has, the permit requires that there's a certain list of industrial and commercial facilities that we have to go out and inspect on a regular basis to make sure that they're handling their waste in a proper fashion and they're not pouring it in the back lot. It's a simplification of what's in the permit, but that's essentially it. And then progressive enforcement required at the bottom just basically highlights the fact that the permit actually requires us to ratchet up our enforcement actions if we're not able to get compliance at the beginning. So if we get somebody that just completely ignores us, we have to take further enforcement actions to try and get their attention so that the city stays in compliance with those federal and state requirements and doesn't get fined. And then development planning. This is when somebody comes in, they want to develop a piece of property, and what's listed there are the general thresholds in the permit. So for instance, 10 or more housing units, you have certain size parking lot you're putting in, certain square footage for certain types of development. And essentially what we do is tell the developer that they're going to have to meet these requirements, and then they submit a plan for how they're going to deal with pollutants that are anticipated to be created by the fact that they're developing that piece of property. So you're putting in a parking lot, you're probably going to be worried about oils and grease and metals and things like that. So what are you going to do as a developer to plan a treatment system, or basically a treatment system that would stay with that development forever? And then what assurances are you going to put in place on that property to make sure that those treatment devices are maintained so that they work properly moving into the future? And this is probably a little bit similar to the presentation that you received from the previous group. I think it was the Watershed Health, if I'm not mistaken. And basically, this is a little bit more detail in regards to what a development project would put into place. It's called low-impact development. And it's relatively new with this permit, although there are locations that have put together ordinance prior to the permit going into an effect. And basically what the idea is that you retain, when you're paving over a vacant piece of property, you're going to change the amount and speed of the flow of the water that comes off of that piece of property. So with low impact development, what you're trying to do is infiltrate that water into the ground so that you can use it as a future resource. You're treating it in that fashion as well, and you're preventing unnecessary erosion downstream because water is traveling off the site much quicker than it previously did. And then this is just the aspect that when you're actually in construction, and I apologize for the slide, it's got a lot of acronyms on it, and I kept it in there because I wanted you to give it a sense of how this permit reads. Like I said, it's over 500 pages. It's quite detailed, and there's a lot of aspects of it so that we have to spend a considerable amount of time at the beginning of any new permit trying to figure out what exactly we need to do, and that Enhanced Watershed Management Plan will help us with that. But essentially, this aspect of it is just when you're disturbing soil and you're building the project, you're creating a situation where sediment can travel off-site that much easier, and you have to make sure that you control that. You're bringing paints and oils and chemicals onto site as you're building houses and the like. You just have to make sure that you deal with them appropriately. We call it best management practices, but basically, you just clean up after yourself and make sure that you're doing what you need to do to contain your operation. And we have inspectors, the same inspectors that go out and try and make sure that people are following these guidelines as well. And then this is my last slide, and I can take some questions if you like. But this is just, we oftentimes get these presentations. We can talk about the programs we put into place, but we get the question of, well, do you have any stats? Do you have any figures of what exactly you do and what you accomplish? So this is just some of the things that of the parts of the program that we're able to quantify, things like 6,000 plus pounds of trash and debris cleaned from storm drains every year. over 2 million pounds of trash and debris picked up from the street sweeper program. We have a river rally event. We tally how much trash that the community helps us pick up on that event. This year, that'll be September 21st. If anyone's interested, we'll be at the Newhall Community Center. We try to move around the valley as much as we possibly can, obviously restricted by parking and things like that. But just give you a flavor that we are accomplishing things with the program. There is a lot of work being done, but all really just to comply with the state and federal regulations. So that concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, please fire away.
I believe this has to do with their stormwater runoff. Used to be, once a week after garbage day, or trash day, you've seen a street sweeper. I can't tell you when I've seen a street sweeper in my neighborhood. Plus, on the bottom of every street, you have a groove cut in the street. Everyone we walk around the block are full of mud and growing with grass. So, evidently, we're not doing what we should on the stormwater cleanup.
Well, since that's more of a specific in terms of location, I'm more than happy to give you my business card. We get calls about the sweeper all the time. One of the things that we worked into the contract a couple of years, I think the last iteration of the contract was they actually have a GPS system. So we can go back and see whether or not they were on that street. Now, along the lines of trying to make sure that we're fiscally responsible, we did, I think it's been 6 years now, we did go from a every week sweeping schedule to a once a month sweeping schedule when the leaves aren't falling. And so basically we try and hold off as much as we possibly can. We start the once a week sweeping sometime around October, and we get 3 months of sweeping once a week, and then we're done per the contract. So what we've tried to do is I welcome those comments. We welcome those phone calls, because that way we're not sweeping streets that you can literally eat off of. We're focusing on problem areas. We get a call, we know about an area, we can go out and do a special sweep for you, and we put up signs telling people they can't park there for the next 24 hours, 48 hours, and we can get a special sweep to there. So if that sort of thing is happening, or the sweeper's just not making it, I'll give you my business card. By all means, more than happy to get out there and do it. It just makes more sense to deal with those hot spots than to go out and clean every street every week, and many times we're cleaning streets that don't need to be cleaned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello?
Yes,
Doug Fraser. When you talk about an ordinance, are you talking about, is a Santa Clarita municipal code? And then when you talk about enforcement, like you go out and the industries have to buy the permit, if an industry doesn't comply with the ordinance or the municipal code, do you actively take their permit away if you can't get them to comply, or how would you enforce the code?
We do not have a system where we administer permits to industry or commercial. That ordinance that we put into place is required under the permit. We're required under the permit to have the legal authority to enforce the state and federal regulations. If one of our inspectors runs into an issue in the field where somebody's out of compliance, frankly, our first goal is to educate and to fix the situation, prevent it from happening. But yes, we've had some situations where, for whatever reason, they do not want to cooperate, and it's the choice between either dealing with the state coming and talking to us about it, or us talking to them. And we have been in situations where we've had to write a ticket. Basically, usually, if it goes through all of the courses, we start with verbal, go to writing, go to fines, and eventually can make it up to the district attorney. I may be speaking out of a hand, but I don't believe we've ever had to go to the district attorney, at least not in the time that I've been here. For the most part, we've really been fortunate from the standpoint that we just explain to people what they can do and they can't do, and we try and work with them on solutions. They're more than willing to do that. It's just less of a headache for them. But we don't have a permitting system. And part of that, someday it may get to that point, but I've worked in other locations outside of Santa Clarita where they had a permit system, and because you have a permit system, you're paying a fee. So you're going to pay a fee to that local entity, and we've tried to avoid things like that because we just don't. we haven't seen it to be necessary. And the other thing that, frankly, we're required to do, and sometimes have had to do, is if it gets to the point where we're not able to deal with it, we're required to call a state inspector and have them come out and deal with the business or the entity that's not doing what we ask them to do. But we try and avoid that as well, because one, the state doesn't have the resources, and two, and I guess this is just me talking, but I'd much rather us be dealing with it and working with our local businesses than having to call on an outside agency to do that.
You're acting like a local agency to enforce the state.
Well, in a way, yes. Is two things. One is we have a permit placed on us directly, so we have to follow that, which means that for the business, it's the people that work at the business. For us, it's everybody that lives and does business in the valley. And then in addition to that, that business oftentimes has a direct permit with the state as well, but we're required to go out there and make sure that they're following certain aspects of their permit.
What's your role in the chloride issue?
Well, frankly, that is a permit that is directly imposed upon the LA County, the Greater Los Angeles LA County Sanitation District. So they are the ones that have the direct negotiations and dealings with the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and at times when it goes up to the State Water Resources Control Board. What I have been involved with has been trying to make sure that I get calls about it. Trying to make sure that if I can't answer the question, I give them to the right contact over the sanitation district, or in some cases the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and then just trying to be as knowledgeable about it as possible, so we can give the information out that I'm able to understand and convey. But I'm not an expert on. I did work at a water reclamation plant many years ago, but never operated it, ran it. I'm not an expert on that. So to be honest, I get phone calls about the chloride TMDL. Most of the time, my next call is to the sanitation district or the Regional Water Quality Control Board to make sure that I get the right answer.
But the stormwater runoff does impact the river, right?
Well, and we're getting into total maximum daily loads, or a TMDL, which is what the chloride is. And that is part of the Clean Water Act. But when you look at total maximum daily loads, and hopefully this doesn't oversimplify it, but what they're doing is trying to figure out what are the significant contributions of whatever pollutant that they're dealing with is. And in regards to the chloride TMDL, the decision that was made was that it was coming from the 2 water reclamation plants. Having said that, there are certain aspects of TMDLs that are placed directly on our storm drain system. In fact, what we're having to deal with as a city, and we're directly impacted by, is bacteria total maximum daily load. So part of that enhanced watershed management plan that we're putting into place, we'll be studying how we deal with that bacteria TMDL, what the sources are, trying to do additional studies to show that certain aspects of the sources are not sources that we have control over, trying to use that information to make the regulation or provide more information to the regional board to make that regulation much more reasonable. So yes, there is a component in the storm drain system, but as of yet, the source that's of concern is the sanitation district's water reclamation plants.
Okay, I was on a water board way back when NPDES was imposed upon us by the federal government. Oh, and by the way, at that time, it was non-point elimination discharge system. There was no national pollution, so they must have changed the name. But be that as it may, what the city did is immediately levied a rather large charge on every dwelling unit to take care of this NPDES. And they gave us one more sweep day of the month with the sweepers. And the city has chose not to have no parking on sweep day like in Antelope Valley. So all the trash and everything that runs to the gutter is still there when that sweeper goes down the traffic lane. And the sweeper has metal brushes and a little water. And we know it's not picking up what's coming off the vehicles, the powdered rubber from the tires, the brake pad, powder, all the liquids, whether it be antifreeze, oil, brake fluid, whatever, they're not getting any of that. So all of that's still going in the river. And that's gone on for some years now that we've been paid in great funds to clean what is coming off of the street roads. Also, the fertilizers from the houses runs into the gutter. So we have all that going down into the river, and the city's not been capturing any of it in all these years. They've just got a sweeper going down the middle of the street, and all the fast food boxes and drink cups are still in the gutter. The gutter doesn't get cleaned. In these cities in Antelope Valley, you see it all cleaned every time it's sweep day. So I'm wondering if things are going to change drastically within the city on this program and really start cleaning what's going into the river. And your enhancement program sounds like another program to add more dollars, and I don't think you need that. I think you need to work the original program the way it was supposed to be worked and keep the stuff from going into the river.
It also runs off the streetways and the paseos and the parks, and I've seen that plenty of times as well.
I'm going to do a slight correction. That non-point discharge elimination system, I believe, is, you mix the elimination with the discharge. But anyway, you might check that. And one thing that I also see is a lot of people let their dogs do their business on the sidewalks, and they don't pick it up, and then it goes into the street, and I'm sure that's going in there. And then the other thing that we have noticed a number of years along Sand Canyon between Clarita Canyon and Sierra Highway, there's always a stream on the east side of water running down along the roadside. When it dries up, it has white residue. It must be gray water, and I'm not sure which one of those units along there is discharging this, but it's been going on for years. So you might check on that.
Definitely. Thank you very much.
No other questions? Travis, maybe you could answer a couple of things. I'm not sure if you have knowledge of this. The water that we're pumping from Shangri-La, we originally were putting it directly into the river, and we did get a fine from the Regional Quality Water Board, and it's now going in, I understand, into the sewer system. Are you aware of the reason why that occurred?
Why it occurred?
Yeah. What were they complaining about when we were pumping water straight out of the ground and putting it in the river?
Well, one of the constituents is chloride. That's not a topic that I've directly dealt with, but I do know that one of the constituents was chloride, and yes, it was put into the sewer to try and prevent further fines and violations. That part I do know.
Okay. Just one other question. On the last chart, it talked about some.
That one?
Yeah, that chart talked about stormwater treatment devices installed throughout the city. Could you explain what those kind of devices are?
Well, that's part of that development program. There's a few that are put in at actual city facilities because we have to follow the same guidelines that the developers do, and then. Yeah, so basically, and then also the catch basin trash excluders. In some locations, we've tried to deal with the trash in that regard. But to a large extent, that's developers have placed those in their developments. And so, to give you an example of what kinds, what was called a CDS unit, I can't even remember what the acronym stands for anymore. But basically, the water comes in one way, the centrifugal force makes the trash fall out, the water keeps going, the trash gets collected later. There are what's called storm scepters. I can't remember exactly how they work, but they're essentially, and these are all just trademark names, But it's kind of a more advanced clarifier. So you have different chambers. The clean water goes off the top, the dirty water stays, and then every once in a while you clean it out to make sure that you're keeping the process working. We also consider basins. We have water quality basins that are specifically designed with plants to slow the water down, allow for the time the plants need to process the pollutants in that water, and then every once in a while, depends on the size of the basin and how much flow, but maybe every decade we go in, completely dredge up the first few feet of it, put in new material, and continue the process of making sure that treatment is happening. Bioswales, there's a whole list. I mean, I can get it for you, but majority of them were put into place by developers that were required to do that, and that's one of the biggest pieces of that now is us going out and make sure they're being maintained, because those property ownerships change. We want to make sure that when it goes from one property owner to the next, they remember, you've got this device in the ground over here. If you don't clean it out, it's completely worthless. You need to clean it out. So, thank you very much.